team at T-shirt for letting us use this lovely space. The Arts Council, of course, are funding Kerry County Council, Kerry Arts, Force na Gaeilge, Ali and na Gaelta, RTE, and our associate sponsor this year, Dingle Distillery, who've been a great support to it as well. So with that, let's get going. Welcome Robert Harris and Catherine Merrigan. I'd like to just show you their amazing book. So last year, Catherine brought out Living Among the Puffins on Skellig Michael, which is a lovely memoir with her beautiful, beautiful photographs in it as well. And I'm sure many of you who live locally will know Catherine. And this year, Robert has just brought out Returning Light, 30 Years of Life on Skellig Michael. So when I first visited Dingle some years ago, before I moved here, Catherine was one of the first people I met. And I went back to Dublin telling everyone about this fascinating woman I'd met with the most interesting job in the world. And it was just after Star Wars had been filmed on the island as well. So it was really exciting time to be there because nobody else was allowed on at the time when Star Wars was shooting. So Catherine had a behind the scenes view of that.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
She had all the secrets. So, but I want to go back to further than that. So Catherine has been on the island as a warden in the summers for over 20 years,
yeah,
am I right?
I started in the year 2000,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
my 21st year.
And Robert has over 30 years under his belt at this stage.
87 when I started, so not 87 years,
87 years.
87.
You're looking well on it, Robert.
I was going to say, pushing that.
Yeah. So I'd like to kind of go back to your first impression of the island when you got there. Before you got the job, you'd visited the island before you got the job there, Catherine.
Yeah.
So what was your first impression as a visitor?
Okay, well, it took about maybe 4 attempts to get there because of the sea conditions. Often you can't get there, so I often got to the port and boats were cancelled, and that happened quite often. And then finally I got on a boat, which I didn't know then. It was an official boat, and we got 4 hours, which normally you only get 2.5. And I barely got to the monastery. I was just looking at the puffins. I was just absolutely blown away. I mean, I'd been living in Dingle for how long, and looking across the Skelligs, and I just couldn't believe it. You just have to be there to know, Yeah, so.
And you described your first visit as well in your book, Robert.
That's right.
It struck you, didn't it?
Huh?
It struck you quite strongly.
Absolutely, yeah. I had actually no intention of going the day I went. We were just driving along and saw the boat advertised in Ballinskelligs, and so weren't really prepared for what I was going to see. And it isn't, like Catherine says, it's another otherworldly kind of place. Simply, I think, particularly because of just the way it just juts up out of the sea. There's nothing else there. You stand up on the peak and all that's there is the sea and the sky and the birds. And even though the terrain is very similar to the mainland, it's completely different because of just being stuck out by itself.
Yeah. And you actually came across, now, Robert was born in South America, is an American, and by passport, has been living in Ireland.
And Irish.
For 42 years here in Ireland. So your mother-in-law lives in Killarney, and it was on a trip down to visit her, you saw a copy of The Kerry Man.
That's
that
right.
fateful day.
That's right. My wife is from Killarney. And we just happened to be visiting, myself and my son. And I was going through the hallway, and there was a Kerry Man there. I don't think it was a current Kerry Man. It might have been a couple of weeks old, advertising this new guiding service. And a month later, I was there. So it happened very quickly.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
And a very long commute from his home in Leitrim,
From
as well.
That's right, yeah.
But it is a commute that is a long commute, I suppose, for anyone getting out there.
Absolutely.
It's quite a trip on the boats, isn't it?
The last 8 miles is the most difficult.
Yeah. And even, Catherine, I remember in your book you talk about how when you got out there, you were actually stranded there. The sea was so rough you couldn't leave for a lot more time than you thought you could as well. So is that something that happens a lot?
Absolutely, yeah. The sea conditions out there are something you couldn't believe. The sea is just wild, and no boats can land at all. So sometimes your stay can go longer than 2 weeks, and sometimes you can't get on, or sometimes you can't get off.
So something I find fascinating about this, and I like my food and I like to know when I'm having my next dinner, but you have to think about what you're going to eat for 2 weeks at a time, bring it all out with you, And if your stay like that, if the sea conditions are rough and maybe there's 4 or 5 days added on to your trip, you have to kind of ration your food out for that as well. Can you tell me a little bit about how you find the organising for a trip?
Yeah, I don't know. I just, at this stage, I'm pretty good at it. I don't know how. I just always have fresh food. We do have fridges in our little cabins. There's no electricity, but there's gas cylinders and solar panels on the top of our little huts. And so at least we have fridges, you know, for fresh veg and that. And the odd time a boatman would bring us some fresh fish as well. Yeah. So that's nice too, you know, but yeah, and we have a lot of time to think about food and a lot of time to eat. And I do a lot of it.
Do you find it a big adjustment though, I suppose, the way you're living, the way you're eating, is it a lot simpler than your life would have been at home prior to that? Or you've managed to get your creature comforts?
You get, I don't know, as Catherine says, over time you get used to managing things. You hope to be on good relations with your next door neighbours. They might share a bit of things with you too sometimes.
Yeah. You need to drop in for a cup of sugar.
Yeah, it's amazing because a lot of people that visit, a lot of tourists, they ask, so what do you eat? I mean, canned foods, or they just can't believe you'd have a big nice dinner, you know, they just can't, But very important part of the day.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about I suppose one of my questions was, what's your favourite part of the day? And I think when, Catherine, you might have a little bit of your book you're going to read in relation to this as well. So I already know what your favourite part is based on this, but tell us about your favourite part of the day on the island, and then maybe if you give us a little bit of that reading, would be great.
Well, I love the light and the sunlight, the morning light, and then the evening light, the sunsets really. I never miss a sunset. So I always go up to the top of the monastery, behind the monastery, where you can get the best view across to the Blaskets, and so that would be my favourite time. And
do you want to give us a
little
bit of the reading?
Yeah, please. Hope I don't stutter now. Slow down, as my mother would say. Okay, let's see. So we have Skelligs at night. Regardless of the weather, each evening I go above the monastery to see the sunset. The sunsets can be remarkable, beautiful, with lots of colours, pinks and purples. Looking across to the Blasket Islands and the Dingle Peninsula to the north, with shimmering golden light on the sea. It's my favourite time of day. I always stay till the very last light. Descending down the 600 steps to the cabin, I first passed through the monastery, eerie at night, and there is always a presence. There's a huge change that happens at this time of night on the Skelligs. The monastery becomes very active just as it becomes dark, and it's a very special experience. The nocturnal birds return home after fishing for the day to feed their young. The storm petrels are minute little birds that fly around like swallows. They're called the dancers of the sea, and at times they trail fishing boats with their dainty little feet dancing on the surface of the ocean. Yeah.
I think both of you have brought the island to life. I haven't been there yet. It's on the to-do list every summer. But I think you've brought it to life so vividly in, your love of nature, the birds, all of that. And you, Catherine, especially with your photographs, you've taken so many photographs of the puffins and all the birds.
1 billion?
Too bad we don't have them here. They're absolutely magical.
Oh, the puffins?
No, pictures.
Yeah. But I mean, that's part of the appeal for you as well, is the nature.
The nature, really, I mean, all aspects of it, but the nature is just incredible. The moonlight, when it's full moon, it's just, there's nowhere like it, Big pathway of golden light on the sea.
Yeah. And Robert, what about you? What would you say is your favourite time of day?
Oh, I think the night time as well. Certainly, it's a time when, you have the island to yourself, more or less. Or the evening, as Catherine's described, but also early morning. Those two sort of intervals, the dawn is more magical. For instance, in the morning, I often would go down to the landing very early just to make sure that the sea is all right, and talk to the boatmen ashore, tell them whether it's okay to come out to the island or not. So you have that magical little place, which is like a little pool of light where the puffins are beginning to stir and the other birds are, and sometimes there's a few seals down there, and that's all very quiet. It's undisturbed by engines or boats yet, so it's a good time of the day.
So tell me, I suppose the living conditions on the island are quite isolated. I think there is maybe 2 guides at a time on the island?
Three.
Three.
Yeah.
Three. So you're not alone, but it is a very different sort of existence to living.
You're not alone, but you are alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just, I suppose, thinking about that in terms of what everyone has been going through over the last year or two with the pandemic. Do you think that it prepared you for lockdowns and that kind of isolation that the whole world, do you think you faced it maybe with better equipped than the rest of us after this kind of isolation that you've had on the island?
Well, it's I don't know, better equipped, but you're familiar with what people are going through. And I suppose it depends on your personality. Some people are more solitary than others. But the thing about being out on the Skelligs is it's a good place to be alone. It's a good solitude in many ways. You still have to confront yourself. You have to confront your life where you are. You've got just these endless horizons around you, so your sense of insignificance can be pretty profound. And I think a lot of people have experienced all those things over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we might have a certain insight into that from our previous experience, anyhow. Yeah.
Do you agree with that, Catherine?
Yeah, I guess. The thing is, when you're on the Skelligs, you have no choice, but it was harder here. You could get in your car and go away somewhere, But yeah.
And interestingly, I suppose that the first lockdown in 2020 was the first year in a long time that you wouldn't have gone over to the Skelligs. Was there
That's right, yeah.
a real gap in your life that year then not going
I
there?
just kept thinking it would happen, There was messages constantly between OPW and ourselves, and kept thinking it would, but then nothing really did happen then of that year, did it?
And I get the sense that it's such a special, magical place that I presume that you both feel a deep attachment to it. Does it feel kind of part of you?
Oh yeah.
Sure, of course, absolutely. Like any place where you spend a long time, but I think probably the difference there, as opposed to people's work commitment, no matter how profound it is that we do live out there. So we stay out there. That's what makes it very different.
Yeah. I suppose every job has its challenges, and even though it sounds beautiful and magical and very special to get to go out and spend that time on the Skellig and watch the birds at such close quarters and really kind of intimately know the cycles of their life, what would you say are the biggest challenges in the job?
Well, I have to say I do feel isolated at times, and 2 weeks can be a long time, on a very tiny island. So that would be my thing, really. It becomes very small, and visually, when the puffins are there, for me personally, I'm happy out. But then come August, the first week in August, they all head away. And then it just empties out, and it's just, the color goes, so I find it more challenging then. The light, it gets darker, it gets colder, and you're out there in all conditions, yeah. So it's like, people, they come out and they, wow, what a job, but it has its challenges for sure, and also like us humans, it's not easy to live 3 people on an island, so I'm not saying I'm not difficult, everybody, so it's challenging enough, that. Yeah. It's lovely to see the visitors. I love to see the visitors coming, I have to say, and sharing, and seeing their light. But often there's weeks, we've been out there weeks at a time where the sea conditions are too wild that boats can't come out there. I find that challenging. Some people not.
Yeah.
I like that.
Getting the place to yourselves.
I'm afraid I do like that, yeah. So, but as Catherine says, I think it's kind of remarkable that we're able to survive together to a certain extent. It is challenging. I mean, sure, you know very well, people have to have their own space, and even though we do supposedly live alone, three little huts close together, people have to make compromises, and we do. You know, it's amazing to see how that works. It's kind of interesting. See
a
how that
sociological
works.
experiment.
Well, no, I wouldn't go that far.
Micro-society.
No, not interested in that. Just a question of survival.
Tell me, I suppose the survival and being away from your family, your loved
Sure.
ones, Catherine, your late dog, who I know is you're so fond of. To be away, I mean, I'd hate to be away from my dog for a few weeks at a time. I can barely manage a day. You know, that must be very difficult when you are there and you're. Sure. It's quite difficult, and I suppose your children. And how has that been over the years? How have you found you've dealt with that?
It's difficult. It's difficult. That would be the main challenge. Trying to balance the home life with life out on the island. And like you say, it was particularly poignant and I suppose apparent when my children were very young. But it's still there, definitely. Transition can be difficult.
And I suppose another thing we talked about just a little bit beforehand was around things happen when you're stuck on the island, and maybe, you know, you can't get off the island just like that. So I believe you have a little poem you're going to read to us, Robert, and it's about, you know, how you deal with maybe getting bad news from the outside. Was something that inspired this poem?
Well, actually, what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is just read a little bit just to lead into that, which is kind of about the isolation on the island. And one analogy I might make is that sometimes it can almost seem like the island just takes off on its own. It's just like a ship. And that kind of leads into the poem. So we'll read just that, if you don't mind. First of all, they're just diary entries. So like I say, sometimes just without thinking, it seems like you're on a ship as well as on a rock. And this comes from the year 2000. The ship of the spirit is being cut loose by hard weather. The ground underfoot rumbles, shakes, quivering in the sea's nascent movement against the rock far below. The ground lurches, balances against the rise and fall of raised waves slowly passing by against the island. And the surf steadily works against the pistons of this island engine. The wheel houses of the monastery and of the little oratory at the peak tighten course upon the air. Energy drills from the high cross, from raven backbone, from rabbit skull, wind to spring and release light and thrust. They adjust themselves almost imperceptibly, but steadily. The island balances and stands stock still. There is a quiet eeriness here this evening. Rock walls shimmer as I pass. The steps shine in the fog. Their hard teeth bite against the island's atmosphere, spiral upwards into the mist. But every night a new demon arrives and surrounds this suspended rock. And the reason I say that a new demon arrives is because you can be on your own there. It isn't as if it's really this magical, blissful existence, but you can be with your own self, and then all of a sudden things happen, and you get very, very clear messages from the outside world, or people from the outside world come. And one of the unfortunate things that's happened on the island, particularly in recent years, is we've had very, very bad accidents there. And we've had fatalities on the island. And one in particular, the last one, was one that I had quite a bit to deal with. And so this is just a little bit about what happens when you're on an island ship and all of a sudden these very tragic or poignant things happen which affect you, which come from the outside world. And so I'm actually writing a little bit about one of these people in this particular entry. In the rain and the wind, I climbed up to the small oratory again, carrying those deceased on the island with me. They were wrestling with my soul, admonishing me there. This is a difficult time to speak of. But I left them there above, as I left the 4 buntings who have haunted the steps and saddle these last few days. But they will return. The sea runs high today. Pressure from Iceland forms the hills of water which surround the rock, which you might walk upon, streaked by long green, white tendrils of hair. solid as the groundlessness is real below your feet. For all has changed here. The pale eye of the sun stretches far southwards now, past the feast of St. Michael. The pilgrims are gone, the island is deserted, no work moves on apace, no controversy rages, no courts of law, just a rock stretching high roads into sky. I sang from the station on the peak above last year, my breath joining with you there beyond the rock, just beyond hand's reach. And yesterday, a handful of passing gannets wove your image before me suddenly within the empty blue ahead. And now I know your hands rest upon my head. The wind bears down upon us here, stretching its arms continually around the rock, bringing all passing lost things near. Outside in the storm, outside of the light tonight, there is a fire of wind, of rain, of full immersion under white hoods of the passing sea. These are monks' hoods. Still they continue to come around the far corner of the point, illuminating the rock, casting an eerie glow down channel pinnacles, catching the quick glimmers of lightning which fire in series their stretching arms surrounding a small pier, reaching high upon blue sky, fanning pairs of wings, their tips suspended feathers of falling crystal and white spray, so that they thunder then onto the steps, tumbling to fall from on high upon the landing, cutting access away and saying through that cascade, no one crosses such a threshold for days on end. Mark your own way out here. And stand to walk upon the night with young fledglings taking their first steps, under cover of darkness, sheltering on the road, shivering and stunned, their instincts briefly overwhelmed, the wind loosened overhead, and their small spirits lifted into the dark, and invisible but for the radical fluttering of their wings, testing themselves within the October air, where we wrestle with our own shivering thoughts, where you pull me to the wall to stand gazing back at the mainland in the dark, the car lights, the village lights swallowed in the mist, and we are left here alone at a far corner of the earth to cast waters hard down on these rocks, to sound and propel the engines sending fledglings on their way out to South America, knowing that very few will be able to return, minding the lanterns here within this darkening stone which vanishes underneath us, leaving us groundless, and walking out beyond the lighthouse wall ourselves, touching our way out over water, playing for keeps for the world. Good night, my new dear friend. We remain here, resting still with your breathing, with this dark air passing over us tonight. We open ourselves once more into the light where all spirits are passing, where everything is always returned. So that's a bit about, I wrote about one of the fatalities that happened on the island.
That's obviously something like that must be very, very difficult to deal with. How do you think in general the island over your years there has changed you as people? Do you think you are very different people today than you would have been had you had a very different job?
Hard to say, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I probably would not have taken photographs or written a book because I'm too hyper. Running around the place, I'd be around the world.
But for someone, I mean, and I know you love traveling as well, so,
Yeah.
you know, it is, I mean, you've gone to the same place every summer for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's a place where there's a lot of solitude, a lot of reflection.
Yeah.
You play your music, you take your photographs. It's given you a creative space, so I suppose
Exactly that.
it's made you slow down
It has
and create
definitely,
maybe.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, things have happened there for sure. It really focuses you more in, you know, because you don't have choices to go somewhere. You have a lot of time, and people come for a few hours of the day, but you have a lot of time to yourself too.
Yeah.
You know, so it does open up that space
Yeah.
for that.
And you both wrote, I suppose, a lot of your books would have come from your diaries of the time there. Am I right in saying that?
That's right.
They would have been a great resource to you in bringing the books together.
Yeah.
So would you both always keep a journal of all your time there? Is that something that's been really important to the process?
Yeah, well, I would have always written every year, you know, something, you know, maybe a little poem or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Off and on,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah.
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 And to answer your earlier question, I don't know whether it changes you too much, but it gives you a depth to the experience there. But one thing I would say is that I think people go to the Skelligs and they also have an insight into the sort of things that Catherine and I might be talking about very quickly in just a few seconds, because it is such a different sort of jolting experience for so many people. Yes. A lot of people don't realize where they're going. A lot of people are just going out for a lark, or maybe they have interest in the birds. But a lot of times, particularly now with Skellig so much on the sort of commercial tourism circuit, a lot of people don't really know what they're going into. But you do find, I'm sure you know too, that people all of a sudden are kind of shocked by the place.
I remember actually a line in your book about, I think someone turned around to you with tears in their eyes and they were very affected by it, and
that
emotionally,
frequently,
spiritually. And so you see that a lot.
Really touched by the place.
That's incredible, isn't it?
It's so unique. I mean, I've traveled a lot, but every single year, the first day back, I always think there's just nowhere like it. There isn't really.
Also, I really want to ask you, have you seen, and I know especially Catherine, you talk so much about the puffins and the birds, that have you seen any changes ecologically over the years? Do you think the Skellig is changing, or is it staying the same? How do you think it's faring?
Well, I think like the colonies, the birds and that, they seem to be doing very well. I don't think it's changed. I mean, I know there's a lot of footage, you know, so, but I think as a place, it's doing really, really well. I mean, the sea seems to be abundant with food so far, you know. In all the years that I was there was this one year that it was a very, very bad year. There was no food in the sea at all. I don't know why that was, but I don't know what you feel about that.
I mean, I feel the same way. We're very fortunate because, I mean, for instance, if you just talk about birds like the puffins, all throughout the northern breeding grounds, north of the Skelligs, they've been devastated in places, in Scotland and Scandinavia and places like that. And maybe it's just because we're right down in the southwestern corner of their habitat. Like Catherine says, there were a couple of years when the sprats and the sand eels were very, very scarce, and the adults were feeding young ones with little pipefish, and they couldn't deal with it, and it was really difficult to watch. On the other hand, I think things are changing. Obviously, the temperature is changing, and the thing that you can see from something like that particular year, the food source can just vanish. It can vanish overnight, and that's what happened in Scotland. So I think one thing that is true is that people are becoming more aware of just how fragile the place is. And that can't be bad, because it isn't just the built heritage there, which is fragile. I mean, you can always replace stones, you can rebuild things, but then they're not original anymore. And that's a concept that it's taken a long while for people to really get to grips with. But the other thing is that you have these birds, and of course the puffins are so colorful and people love them, but they're, as Catherine mentioned earlier, they're these night birds too that most people never see. And they're these tiny little storm petrels. You hold them in your hand, you don't even know what you're holding, and yet these little creatures fly off. They're off beyond the equator right now. They're off the coast of South America, and they come back and they go into the same little places right between the stones in the cells. They live to be up to 40, and the Skellig is like a little magnet for all this life. There are hundreds of thousands of birds, and they're all out in the ocean right now, and they all have this little magnet that's going to turn on in April. They're going to go right back there. So,
it's incredible, isn't it? With that, actually, Catherine, I might get you to do your second reading for us about the puffins. That would be a lovely time to bring that in.
You have to come and see the puffins, guys. There's something else. Let's see now. I read. Okay, the puffins. They're very social and wander around in little groups or colonies. A lot of billing goes on, which is an act of endearment. Rabbits who live there still do well, and I have seen puffins and rabbits living in the same burrow, an underground world we don't know about. It's amusing to see them coming out of the same places. They seem to work it out. I love music and play a few different instruments, not very well, but I often sit up on a rock and the puffins will come and sit around me as I'm playing. Sometimes, if I've been sitting there a while, they start pulling at my jacket. I think at this stage I'm just part of the place. And I just have one other little part, and that will be all I'll read. So we have 8,000 pairs of puffins living on the island. We count them every day, by the way. Living in little burrows for their nesting season. Some have been tagged, and we know that they come back to the same burrow every year with the same partner. They arrive en masse in April, set up their homes, have their chicks, and then leave en masse the first week in August. They go out to the middle of the North Atlantic and sit on the ocean all winter long. Some even go as far as Greenland. They rest on the sea and dive for food. The only time they come to land is for the nesting season. Burrow spaces are limited, so there are 4 pairs that have set up home underneath the cabins where the caretakers live. Our huts are located in the middle of a puffin village. There's a wall in front, and it's hilarious watching them walk up and down the wall. They are busy all the time. There's a constant activity 24 hours a day. They're very entertaining, they're feisty, curious, very social, and I frequently laugh out loud at their antics. When I leave my door open, which is most of the time, visitors come in. There'll be a little pitter-patter of feet, and then suddenly puffins are running around the inside of the cabin. Once, one of the puffins jumped into my wardrobe, looking around and feeling very comfortable there, and it took me a long time to get him out. On hot nights, I leave my door open, and my wake-up call is usually a puffin coming in. They have little webbed feet and a Charlie Chaplin walk, and they come in and pirouette and leave a little gift on the floor.
Sometimes more than one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm so glad you read that bit. That was one of my favorite bits, actually.
Oh, really?
I just thought they're little characters. And I think, I think what these books really bring to life is that, any of us can go out on the boat and visit the islands, but none of us will really get to experience what you both do. It's such a special thing that you have there. I know there's a lot of hardship and probably very cold nights and stormy seas, and I know, Robert, you spoke in your book about when you're coming back and the entire hut had just been blown away in an Atlantic storm.
The first hut we lived in, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's absolutely magnificent to get this wonderful insight that they've given us in these books. So we have a few minutes left. I really feel like I should end this like Desert Island Discs and ask you what your luxury items are that you bring and your one song you couldn't do without. But it's not quite a desert island, it's a rocky island. But I'd like to actually give a chance to people here to ask some questions if we have any from the floor. Put your hand up or shout if you can through the mask. Don't be shy. Yeah, Declan there.
What are your jobs?
So we're caretakers of the island, more or less, So we give talks about the history, and then we're also trained in case people have accidents, which can happen quite often, and really just looking after the wildlife as well.
Yeah, we basically are wardens to a certain extent. We monitor the access to the island. Obviously, the waters get kind of busy in good weather, so we monitor who's coming, and like Catherine said, we have to look after the visitors because it is a very precipitous rock. So you have to be careful with sort of monitoring the people there when they are there, and look after the wildlife and the site, the island itself in general.
Very good, really enjoyable talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to yours.
Anybody else? Yes.
Catherine, can I ask what would happen if you got really ill, or if it was an emergency?
Yeah, that's a tricky one actually, because it depends on the sea conditions. But if it was possible that you could get off, we would just phone. Well, somebody else would phone. What would happen to me? I can't say anything. But there would be a protocol. You would just get onto the radio or phone, and then they would bring in either helicopter, but they don't land on the island anymore. Really, they kind of put the
Went you up.
Yeah.
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 Have you ever had to be lifted off the island?
No, but have been under the helicopter when people have
Yeah.
been lifted, and that's the force is quite overwhelming. Yeah.
Do you see it? Yeah.
They were making the film there. I know I read at some stage that some of the Puffins, it just reminded me of the force of the helicopter, that some of them were falling off and whatever. Was there any environmental damage done or any damage done to the wildlife for that film?
I think in the beginning
Yeah.
they came in and they flew around the Kittiwake and Gillimore
Yeah, the downdrafts from the helicopter
the
actually
chicks.
blew some of the young chicks off at the very beginning of that whole process, and very most unfortunate. But at least because of the knowledge of that, the helicopter flights were stopped, and they were only just used very briefly to bring in the actors. So we were able actually to organize it so that they were not able to come out in helicopters to bring any of the equipment or set up that way. So it limited the amount of helicopter activity when that was going on.
Yeah.
Yep. At the back there.
Have either of you ever been terrified on the island, or has it always been a joyful experience? Have you ever felt terror there?
I don't know, is terror the right word? I've certainly felt very, very isolated. I don't think I've ever felt terrorized. It's a place where I feel safe. I think I might feel more terror on the mainland sometimes than there. But you know, you are surrounded by nature, and it's kind of a wild nature. So sometimes that can, I suppose the sense of terror. I wouldn't say terror so much as a feeling of utter insignificance can be very strong. That would be the way I would feel, anyhow. Yeah.
So you're not afraid of a storm?
No.
The nature part. I don't know. It doesn't.
No.
Yeah.
At times
No.
humans can be a bit scary, but the nature part, not. No. No.
And we had another question here.
What was your feeling generally on Star Wars?
Well, I mean, for myself personally, I was quite strongly against it coming to the island. I had nothing against Star Wars. I enjoyed the movies. I liked them when I was a kid. But I would have been strongly against having any sort of commercial development on the island, simply because what we were talking about earlier about the fragility of the island. And I think actually that I think there's a kind of a growing understanding of that. And of just the preciousness. I mean, the island is so important to the economy in Southwest Kerry. So it's very important that it continue to have the exposure that it does have, that exposure changes, particularly given our current obsession with climate change and just the fragility of the world in general. So I think maybe there's a different kind of awareness growing about what's the best way to preserve the skelligs. I hope it is, anyhow.
It was funny when they told us there was a movie going to be made there. I was hoping it was going to be Johnny Depp with his ship, and then Star Wars. For God's sake!
But you know, the funniest thing about all of that is these Hollywood people came over and they were very secretive, and it was all this talk about this movie. And the first rumor was it was going to be James Bond. That's what everyone said on the island. And I kind of thought that might
All
be
three of you.
that might be kind of fun. I'd like to see the car chase on the Skelligs anyhow. But then they couldn't believe that the grapevine found out very quickly what it was. And when they came out, I said, you know, everyone knows. And they were furious. They said, how is that possible? I said, because it's Kerry. So, you know, the word got out very quickly.
Yeah, there was, I kept saying cut, I'm afraid, because it just goes on and on. You see the same thing over and over again. But I always remember there was one moment when they were in a very important part of making the movie. And all of a sudden, a big whale was breaching out of the water.
Humpback.
And everybody it just became so much more real, the real things, you know, because
Yeah.
everybody turned to the whale, you know, so it was pretty incredible, you know, the real world, apart from, you know, in contrast with the Hollywood world.
Brilliant. Really? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder, do visitors leave any negative imprint on the island?
It's hard to say. I mean, I've seen very little willful damage, hardly any at all over the years. But it's very difficult to know what kind of effect. I mean, you have 17,000, 18,000 people every year. Mm-hmm. What kind of effect does that have on dry stone construction? It has some effect. And for instance, when I first started working on the island, in the monastery itself, there were little cut crosses in the pavements, and they're worn away now. So you have to have a trade-off between allowing people access and those sort of things happening. And that's a difficult balance to draw. So there's inevitably, erosion because of footfall, I suppose. But how much that is very difficult to quantify. Yeah.
Do you think there should be a limit on the amount of visitors?
Well, there is.
Yeah.
There is.
And do you think
Yeah.
it's enough?
There's 180 people that can come
Yeah.
once a day,
Once a
and
day.
that's it.
Yeah.
And that's enough,
That's
really.
enough.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, guys, I'd like to thank you so much. I don't want to run over time, but I just have a few more housekeeping announcements before the end. So thank you so much to Robert and Catherine for joining us this evening.